Alright, hello everybody, Anton is here, and this is the second part of the series where I describe how to create this particular drone inside Photoshop, Illustrator, and Fusion 360. So this is the second part where I put the original sketch that I created in the part 1 inside Illustrator. And this is really not like a step-by-step tutorial, more like a time-lapse with my commentary on it. So I would point on certain things that are important, but I won't be like, saying which button to press and all that. So you can see I already done some work, and just to show on this whole time lapse, I've kind of already cut out bits and pieces, because I mean overall it's really repetitive inside Illustrator, because it's really super basic. You just use a pen tool and you draw a few lines, and that's about it. It's with not much to it. It's a bit in the next part I'll talk about Fusion. There'll be more technical stuff that I'll be able to talk about. But in Illustrator, it's really straightforward. I draw a line and a layer to create an overlay on the sketch, and I'll just talk about kind of my ideas behind it, kind of my philosophy about it. So when I was doing this, I was trying to get all those random bits on the sketch. I was trying to get them as much as I could, meaning like I would outline all of them, and because it's really important to get that. If you don't really capture all those small details, if you simplify your original sketch too much, you're gonna get really boring. And that I had that issue before, where I would have a really cool sketch in the beginning that I would try to do it, and I would start to simplify and simplify and simplify, and I'll end up with a super boring sketch. By the way, just have seen like I've been using this really cool feature inside Illustrator where you can essentially curve the angles, make them round the angles, make them all rounded. It's really handy if you press on the point and make it slightly rounded. And the thing I picked Illustrator in the first place, it was because it's really easy to create an outline in here, and I've had some experience with Fusion, but I really wanted to get inside Fusion the easiest way possible. So I thought, okay, let's say if I start doing stuff inside Illustrator, that's really super easy way to do it. However, while it is easy to do stuff inside Illustrator, the stuff it creates essentially a vector outline, which you can send to Fusion as .svg file, which is if you've ever done any kind of design work, you're really familiar with that format. It's a vector standard to export files between applications. However, in Fusion, .svg file does not import. Well, it's all funny. It's like you get circles that are no longer circles. Some angles are broken, so it really deforms the sketch quite a bit. So you have to use another format called .dxf, if I'm correct. I think .dxf. It's more like a card type of format. I mean, you can also import it as .dwg, but the easiest import by looks so far is either .svg or .dxf, just because you get it straight in the interface in Fusion. However, when you do that, you still encounter issues, such as the best way to do an outline is to do it inside Fusion. However, I don't think it's the fastest way. And I say it, well, essentially because Fusion doesn't really understand the sketch as the input. It's a bit hard to explain, but certain bevels will not run right. So if you have a lot of dots and like rounded corners, uh, I had to simplify the sketch quite a bit inside Fusion later on, because having too many of these little dots on the corners and all that then prevents from beveling it properly, and I ran quite a bit of issues with that. So I actually don't have a like a super great solution about it, and I've talked to my friend about this particular issue. He was doing a little bit of that, like Illustrator to Fusion stuff as well, and he said like he was encountering the same issues that he didn't know how to go about. But he was still sticking to Illustrator again because it's so much faster to do stuff inside Illustrator, and even if you have to tweak certain stuff inside Fusion, it's still faster to do it inside Illustrator. I will explore if I can do outline work inside Fusion a bit more. I just don't really feel like that. I don't feel like it's fast enough. And like in Fusion, you can all the time you can randomly click somewhere, so you'll exit the like 2D space into 3D space, while inside Illustrator you always into 2D space by default. You cannot actually exit anyway. I just feel like you need to try this workflow for yourself and see how it works out. Just try it with something less complex than this guy, right? Like I would really rather do just the Wien or something like really easy. I decided to go with this stuff that complicated because originally I actually was thinking about using Blender, and I've done a fairly complex vector outline for Blender, which I've imported to Blender successfully, and I extruded it and beveled it inside Blender, and you can get a really cool. I've got a really cool bevel effect in Blender. However, you do get you're kind of stuck in Blender. You're kind of stuck with the 2D design because you've just extruded and you bevel it, and there you go. That's it. We cannot edit it. You cannot do proper body like I had it of veins. It's just impossible to do like really nice curved veins there, with the curved profile, like you can do in Fusion. So I decided that okay, I probably can do something really complex, drop it in Fusion, and that should work as a charm, but it didn't. So I had to tweak the sketch later on the go. And you can see that here I've done quite a bit of progress already. It's probably about 2 or 3 hours of real time inside Illustrator for sketching. You can see I'm using like a full screen mode for quite a bit of operations because again, you only need a pen, tool, that's a P shortcut for that is P. Then you only need to switch the colors between black and white essentially. So it's all black and white, and also had an opacity shortcut put at 80%. So I'll press A to be my opacity shortcut. It's a bit harder to set up shortcuts for the pathfinder, which the one you need to do the boolean operations, like to combine shapes or subtract shapes, and you really need to have a clean outlines for the expert. You cannot have like stuff laying on top of each other with different colors. So you won't have I have like white circles on my veins. So I had to use a subtract operation to subtract the white circles from my veins. And to apply a hotkey to Pathfinder, you actually have to create an action command. Like you go to action palette, you click on new action, and there'll be a pop-up to assign a hotkey to that new action. You put a hotkey to the action, and then you press the button of the Pathfinder, and it stops the action as well, and it becomes your hotkey. It becomes your like a command assigned to a hotkey. That's a bit tricky and kind of works, but not ideally. So I had to still go back to the Pathfinder palette and use the buttons every now and then. So you can see here I've originally created an antenna that was just exactly like on the sketch, all broken down. But then I decided, okay, there's no point to have broken down that much. I'd rather make something a bit more solid like this one. One thing I didn't do in this file, I haven't thought too much about the joints, and that gave me a lot of pain later on. Like I haven't thought about the joints on how I rotate the wings. I kind of didn't have a good idea about it, and I thought, okay, I'll just figure that out inside Fusion, which I did, but it took me way more time because uh, Fusion, like navigation and stuff, the way you rotate objects around is just funky, honestly, and it's really quite a different. You have to like get it and feel a different approach to it. Very different than in traditional 3D software. So it's better to think about your joints a little bit on paper before you drop it there inside Fusion. And joints here are really simple, honestly. They just rotate in electromotors. I'll talk about them a bit more inside Fusion part. But anyway. So this particular part, in the end, I deleted it in the Fusion sketch because it was kind of overcrowding all, the overall model. Because the wing itself is fairly small, and when it puts so much stuff on the little wing, with antennas and some kind of microphone or sensor on top, it starts to look like that wing can't really hold that much weight. So I had to let it go. But at this stage, I was also still trying to capture the original funky sketch, original fast sketch as much as I could. So I would try to draw all the shapes I saw on the Photoshop sketch and then simplify it later. And you can see that these blades, I did draw the blades, but I never actually put the blades. I was kind of explaining in the previous part, but essentially, if you put the blades in and you model them, then you need to render them, and you cannot actually render them static. You have to do, render them in the motion blur. To get the motion blur right, you need to spin them. For example, I was doing rendering inside Keyshot, so I need to spin them inside Keyshot. And I was kind of getting tired of the whole thing, so I decided, like, I'd rather just have some magic circles, magic Vortex engines there that propel the craft inside air and underwater, rather than do all the blades and blades assembly. And also, the craft was getting a bit heavy inside Fusion, so I decided that I'd rather not bother doing the blades. So I'm going here simplifying the outline a little bit, which is a good thing. Yeah, that particular little thing didn't make it into the final 3D, this little antenna, just because it just didn't look right. Tried it and tried it again. I really wanted to put it there, but it just didn't look right. I also should have had little lights on the Like here, supposedly I would have had little like left, right, red, white lights on antennas. But again, I got a bit lazy and I decided not to do them. Though they would have added a little bit more realism. And I used to have a drone myself, so I had a DJI Phantom 3, which I crashed later on. And I crashed it, then I was trying to fix it. I've done a fair amount of work, like disassembling it, like soldering parts, changing motors, all that stuff. So I know a little bit about drone insides. I don't know if that really helps or not, but maybe it helps a little bit, like knowing how the drone is made. You can see here me also using like a pick tool, picker tool. To if I have a really thick line, then I'll pick a line that's white. It's like 1 point, actually not 1 point, like a 0.1, and that was helping to speed up the process as well quite a bit. Also, when I export this sketch, and I'll talk about that later as well in Fusion, you have to export it at 1 centimeter in scale, because that's super important when I input it inside Fusion itself. I actually haven't even figured out a proper way to input inside Fusion, because every time you input it, you somehow find it in some left corner of Fusion, where you have to drag it across. Though this particular sketch is centered inside Illustrator, so I'm still trying to figure out the way to properly input it inside Fusion. So all of these lines that will be later converted to like solid bodies, expanded, they will be all expanded, and then I will subtract them from the black bodies, right? So from the top. I did encounter the issues like when I did these cool lines on wings, and I did these lines in the body. But unfortunately, you really need this whole wing as one piece inside Fusion, so those little lines, they kind of become unusable. So I had to actually delete them all inside Fusion, all the inner lines for wings and such and body, and then do an extrusion. I would extrude the whole body, and then I would redraw these lines, and again would cut, do these nice cuts later on. And the wings were the most painful objects to deal with inside Fusion, because again, I have this little bevels here and there, but then I want to do one huge bevel on the whole thing. And those little dots here and there, they actually prevented me from doing the bevel. So maybe the solution for that is just to make really simple shape inside Illustrator with as little dots as possible. And then if you need, you can bevel it like that. You can bevel it inside Fusion as much as you want. And it's really important to export parts of the sketch separately, like if they're overlapping, like I have a wings overlapping on the structure. It's important to export it separately, because if you export everything as one sketch, this stuff is going to overlap, and then if you do extrusion, it's going to be extruding small parts of overlapping bits. It's going to become a nightmare, honestly. So everything that's overlapping has to be sent separately. I also have a couple of shortcuts to send stuff in front, and also shortcuts to send stuff to different layers. That helps the process a lot. So again, different like overlapping parts of the body will be sent to different layers, especially like this antenna, like this really big leg antenna. Definitely needs to be on a separate layer. You can see also the cuts on the body. They didn't make it in the final design, again, just because I had to delete all the small cuts that were done across the body or across the wings, because they were ruining the extrusion. And Fusion treats all these extrusion slices. They become like 3 or 4 different parts of one solid body, so you cannot actually bevel across the whole component. So I have to have these big parts, again, body and wings as solids. And this is the stuff you kind of can't really know before you export it. And I definitely would encourage you to do something like that, but on a smaller project, and see how it works inside Fusion. Because yeah, then it kind of changes your perception of it, and you start to think, okay, maybe I need more preparation inside Illustrator, and more specific preparation inside Illustrator, because it's so what really needs to be done. Obviously, a huge drawback that you design everything as a silhouette, as a 2D design, and certain bits they start in 3D, they might look too big, for example, too thick, and this is stuff that's hard to deal with, honestly. But I had to start exploring Fusion because you guys have been surprised to me. For example, you know that I've been doing 3D code work forever, but 3D code again doesn't give you that a nice edge that you can add, or that nice bevel, controllable bevel that you can achieve inside Fusion. Also, I realized that when I was doing stuff in Fusion, I overcomplicated the frontal elements, but at the same time I haven't had enough like density of on the back elements, and I'll probably be, if you look at the renders, will be a bit more evident. But I usually assign hotkeys as I go all the time. Even especially if I haven't used the software for a little while, and then if you know that you're going to use the software even the whole day, right? It makes sense just to go there and while you're working on the project, just start assigning hotkeys. Even that just mindset that this hotkeys is only going to last you one day. It's really important because I mean it's still gonna free up few minutes here and there. And for example, here the hotkeys I had to memorize will like create in a circle because I was making so many circles. Then switching the colors, I think it's X or Shift X. Switch the black and white color again. This is all just black and white all over. And then hotkeys they created later to assign parts to different layers because it's a bit troublesome to do inside. Because inside Illustrator, if you want to drop something into another layer, you have to go into the menus and look for the operation. It takes a while. Again, you can see all these cool cool circles inside the beans. I had to create them here, but then I had to essentially delete them all and recreate them later. And I'm thinking probably I should create them as my cutting circles anyway. I'll like have a separate sketch inside Illustrator that I'll implement later to cut through my objects. Because when you have a complex like assembly inside Fusion, it's tricky to cut stuff through and drawing lines. Maybe I'm just not used to it enough, but I'd say it's just tricky. Right, so this is more like at the stage where I'm starting to expand all of my lines. I've actually put, you can see I've put a separate background of gray color to the sketch, so I could easily see all my white lines, white circles. Well, I'm not really sure why I do stuff individually. I think I was just like expand everything individually. I think I was just looking for little mistakes here and there. You can see like here, for example, it wasn't long enough, that part, so I had to connect it all together. And I say like pick them individually versus like selecting everything and do an expand all operation. And you can see here I'm using a hotkey to subtract stuff, just because it's an operation that they have to run over and over again. So I had to create an action and assign a hotkey to an action of subtraction. It doesn't always work. It's a bit funny, but especially when you combine stuff, it doesn't always combine properly. So I have to combine in shape mode and also combine in pathfinder mode. You can see all it's written there. I'll be especially aware of stuff that you were thinking about to make them circular. So if you're doing an outline of an object and think, okay, this is going to be I don't know, a drum of a gun or antenna here, and it's going to be a circular, like it's going to be a cylinder. The thing is that sometimes this particular outlines they become super thick cylinders, so it's really easy to go out of proportion, thinking that a silhouette to this silhouette will give you a nice cylinder, but when you actually revolve it around, it becomes a huge, thick cylinder. It's way out of proportion, and kind of out of control if you really want to make it circular. Yeah, it's an endless cleanup stage. And I quite like it in Illustrator, even if you do this cleanup and you kind of destroy code, quote unquote, mesh, you can always combine it together, move the vertices around, move the points around, and then delete all that stuff and combine it. It's pretty easy to do. So even though I expand everything and subtract, it's not super harmful. Overall, I think this whole thing took me about 5 hours to do. This whole Illustrator bit. It's fairly complex, so it took a while. Also, when I have a whole bunch of shapes, they do not subtract properly, so I had to use the intersect option on the pathfinder menu, and then manually delete the white parts. Okay, it then combines all of this stuff together, like I'm doing right now. I'm combining all of them together. And then I press the intersect button, and then I delete the white parts, and that creates me a clean sketch. Just that's something I have to do with really complex stuff where I cannot subtract easily, because then subtracts. You want to subtract like only the circle line of the circle, but it constricts the whole circle, this whole solid, way too much. And also, I was quite aware that while I have this like thin line gaps between the parts, that I'm gonna have like real gaps when I extrude inside in Fusion. And that was okay because I knew they were really tiny and they wouldn't be really visible. It wouldn't be really understandable that goes through the whole body. It's like it's magically holding everything together. It's not actually solid object. It's broken apart to parts that just are hanging in the air. And there were certain bits that I didn't like and I was trying to redo quite a few times. So this one in particular, I've modified it and modified it over and over again, and it just I couldn't get happy enough with it. And then I dropped this old stuff inside Blender. So the thing is that I want to. There is a really cool plugin, a box kind of plugin that I already bought for Blender, and I wanted to use it on an extrusion version of the vector graphics. But when I extrude something like that, you get a really dirty mesh. Like it's all triangulated and it's all pretty ugly. So you cannot actually run the box kind of boolean operations there. You have to remesh the whole thing. But if you want to remesh it and have a nice beveled mesh and all that, it's gonna be like 3 million. I can tell you pretty confidently that for this to remesh this guy, it's gonna be about 3 million quartz. And that stuff is super slow in Blender, and also still like doing some nice smooth surfacing on veins wouldn't have been possible. I was just thinking that maybe I'll figure something out with the veins, but I just wasn't able to figure out anything out with the veins inside Blender. But in my next videos after this whole project is gonna roll out, I'll show some stuff that I've done again using Illustrator and Blender. There's some cool stuff you're still capable to do. This is the remesh function, remesh modifier inside Blender. Okay, so I have this kind of holders, the circle bits that I should have done more of those like real world connectors, a real world holding mechanism. It really adds believability to the whole design when you have those bits. I don't have. I have a lot of them here. I don't really have enough of them in front. So I think in front looks less realistic. Or I should have. I thought a bit more, about doing mechanical bits for all those little antennas, so they could have moved a little bit here and there in front. I've made some, but not enough. They again, if you look, if you're thinking about insects as inspiration, there are plenty of little bits in the insect code that are movable, and I should have thought more about that. But yeah, definitely think that starting with this Illustrator, having fun, just pure designing, pure creative process inside of it, and then sending it to Fusion is definitely one of the best ways you can get acquainted with Fusion without getting like overbogged, like bogged down by the complexity of Fusion software itself. I mean, Fusion is not that hard to learn, but still, uh, it's kind of something that gets you motivated when you have it when you're halfway there. When you've done the sketch and dropped it inside Fusion, then it's only a few extrusions and fillers that you need to do to finish it off. Well, it took me over here longer than I thought, but still, it's definitely a way to go and a way to experiment. Right, so this was supposed to be like a rotating mechanism for the wind, which actually wasn't correct. Again, I should have thought a bit more about how I should be rotating it. I mean, in theory, it would have worked, but it really didn't have enough supporting structure there for proper electric motor. I mean, a proper, well, what I mean by proper is like, so that means logically in place, logical size that gives enough logical torque to this fantasy robot. If you do some super small motor for a huge element, then it doesn't look right. It looks like bullshit, and you want to avoid it as much as you can. Right, I'm nearing the end of the sketch, so you can see here I'm trying to make this. I'm deleting everything that's poking out, so I want to make a perfect half of the sketch that I will just import later. I will only input the half. So as you can see, I'm trying to align everything along this particular line of space. So everything is nice. And then I will expand the white line and I will subtract it from that sketch, from all of those sketches. Right, I think I did that. Again, doing this little bit's definitely not worth doing it. Like for export on the eyes, just a waste of time. You'll have to delete them inside Fusion anyway. Here, I think I thought that I have to export the whole body, which I didn't really, but I kind of did that for a test, I think. That's why I had to decided to combine the whole body. You can see certain parts kind of overlapping. That's why I have transparency in all of the on all the spots, so I can see like underlying structure here and there. Again, I haven't used any of those underlying structures at all in the end because it wasn't really well thought after, and I had to rethink all the joints that was put in on everywhere. Again, well, comes with experience. And that's really about it. So, last few seconds, and it's pretty much good to go to Fusion. And see you in the next video in the Fusion part.